Still talking about, just briefly, about section 3 of Landsberg's The Experience of Death. There's just one more thing that I wanted to call your attention to in that section before moving on to section 4. And although this is somewhat premature, Landsberg mentions Christianity. It becomes evident that Landsberg is a Christian. He's a Catholic. He's thinking like a Christian. He's thinking like a Catholic. He's trying to come to terms with death not only as a philosopher but as a Christian. And he says something in the latter part of section 3, which is quite interesting about Christianity. He's comparing it to Buddhism. And the way that Buddhism, the idea is you break the cycle of reincarnation so that not only do you not die anymore, you're not born anymore. That is, you break the whole cycle of birth and death. My primitive knowledge of Buddhism, I don't know anything really, is that all life, all earthly life is suffering. So what you want to do is to sort of get out of that cycle of earthly life. But Christianity has a different idea, and I just want to call your attention to what he says on page 198. He says, the Christian concept of survival, and by survival he means survival of death, the personal survival of death, understood in its relationship to the ontological category of eternity, represents a final liberation from the time and change and earthly becoming which imply death. The individual finds himself, as it were, lifted above the stream of generations. But Christ promises a birth which shall be followed by no death. Buddha promises a death which shall be followed by no birth, and thus by no further death. Christianity is the supreme affirmation of victorious life. That is and he goes on there. I'm sorry. At the very end of section 3, he says Christianity presupposes the Jewish faith, according to which this sequence is solely due to original sin and can therefore be broken in virtue of a new birth by the intervention of divine grace, which will triumph over sin and by the same act over death. That is, part of getting this essay, I think, is part of it is realizing that for Landsberg, that is the significance of Christ. That is, the significance of Christ, or the essential nature of Christ, is that he is the victor over death. And it gives you some notion of how he conceives of death. That is, death as the threat, death as the menace, death as that which threatens to wipe out the individual. That it's in Christianity, it's in the person of Christ that the Christian achieves a victory over that threat, victory over that menace. And I think section 4, looking at section 4 in the next video, will give us a sense of what that victory would consist of, and what the way in which death is the great opponent, the great threat, the great offense against our personhood.